The following program is made possible by friends and partners of the Quick Study Television Ministry. Thank you for your support.
It is impossible for the spirit of man to attain peace. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Rod Hem.
I'm Janice.
And I'm Corey.
And this is the Quick Study Television program. Thank you for joining us today as we continue to go through the Bible. We learn some principles, and those principles are, well, not politically correct, but they're true. Today we focus on 2 Samuel chapters 3 through 5. The momentum of war cannot be stopped. And we'll be talking about that as we realize it takes more than the will of man or the ideas of a collection of men to stop war. It requires Sar Shalom, the Prince of Peace. We'll be talking about that and more as we go along through the program. Right now we have Bible Archaeology with Corey Hembry. Corey?
We are going to be exploring the archaeology of two specific biblical sites. One of them is Beth Shean, where the Philistines are said to have brought Saul's body and his son's body to. So we're going to explore that archaeologically.
And I was there back in 1996, and we were there for a couple of days shooting television. It's a fascinating site, fascinating. All right, we also have the Bible Discovery TV Challenge.
Here it is. It's short and sweet. Who had a son named Mephibosheth? Saul, Ishbosheth, or Jonathan?
Now, say that 10 times fast.
I don't think so.
Mephibosheth, right? Something like that. No, don't say that 10 times. It's like Maher-shalal Hashbaz. That was the son of Isaiah. All of this and more coming up. Stay there as we continue.
Everything in the known universe is made up of matter and energy. The first law of thermodynamics states that the total amount of energy and matter is finite and isolated. Einstein proved it mathematically with his famous equation E equals mc squared. In short, there is energy flow and transfer, but energy is not created in this present universe. This is absolutely consistent, by the way, with the account of Genesis in the Bible. The book of Beginnings says that God created the earth and the universe in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested from his work. He was finished. In other words, no new energy or matter was injected into the universe. So the book of Genesis is consistent with the first law of thermodynamics.
Take a minute with you and explore a very significant event in David's life and the place where this event happened. Now, David wasn't actually at the place of Beth Shean when this event took place. Of course, I'm talking about the death of his best friend Jonathan and Jonathan's father, King Saul. See, they died in a battle on Mount Gilboa with the Philistines, and the Bible is very specific that they took the bodies to Beth Shean, and Samuel in Chronicles tells us that they hung the bodies on the wall of Beth Shean, and 2 Samuel adds a little bit of a detail. They said that they hung them in the public square, which is probably a reference to the front of the wall where the gate would have been. But anyway, a lot of people will tell you that the archaeology at Beth Shean disproves the Bible. Well, that's wrong. Beth Shean is famous for its appearances in the Bible. It is the city the Philistines took the bodies of King Saul and his sons to. On its walls, they hung the bodies. In 2 temples, they displayed the royal armor and Saul's head. Beth Shean means house of quiet. Much of the excavations at the ancient site of Beth Shean have been focused on the Roman city Scythopolis that lies at its base. Yet even still, much has been learned of the older city. The city was positioned on 2 main throughways, a north-south and an east-west. It shows telltale signs of Egyptian control during what would have been the time period of the Judges. An argument against the Bible's accuracy has been the lack of evidence so far of Philistine occupation of Beth Shean when the Bible clearly shows they had control of it. However, the Bible also tells us that when Saul lost the battle, surrounding citizens picked up and fled their cities. The Philistines would have walked into Beth Shean, an old Egyptian city, without a fight. Soon after, David is credited with expelling the Philistines, so any Philistine presence at Beth Shean would have been brief and without massive construction. Another major criticism is that no ancient walls have been found. However, all excavations deep enough to find any walls were conducted where the later Roman city was built. Any ancient crumbling roadblocks no doubt would have been removed by the Roman builders. Today, the mound of Beth Shean stands dominating the landscape where it has for thousands of years, silently testifying, holding secrets long forgotten. This is Beth Shean, House of Quiet.
Second Samuel chapter 4, the momentum of war. Just as the momentum of war in our world is hard to turn, so is the momentum of war in our hearts. Some estimates claim that nearly 40% of the world's wealth is spent on warring, killing, and destruction, protecting national interest, protecting property, protecting rights, and protecting one's wealth. This is the chief cause for modern global war. War is the way of man. It's his idea. And Saul created a war machine in ancient Israel. David also did for his very survival. So in today's study, we study the heartache of David as the war machine continues to churn on in both houses of Saul and David in ancient Israel.
2 Samuel 4, verses 1 through 11. When Saul's son heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost heart, and all Israel was troubled. Now Saul's son had 2 men who were captains of troops. The name of one was Baana, and the name of the other Rechab, the sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite, of the children of Benjamin. For Beeroth also was part of Benjamin, because the Beerothites fled to Gittaim and have been sojourners there until this day. Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son who was lame in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled. And it happened as she made haste to flee, that he fell and became lame. His name was Mephibosheth. Then the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, Rechab and Benaiah, sent out and came at about the heat of the day to the house of Ishbosheth, who was lying on his bed at noon. And they came there all the way into the house as though to get wheat, and they stabbed him in the stomach. Then Rechab and Benaiah his brother escaped. For when they came into the house, he was lying on his bed in his bedroom. Then they struck him and killed him, beheaded him, and took his head, and were all night escaping through the plain. And they brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron, and said to the king, "Here is the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul your enemy, who sought your life. And the Lord has avenged my lord the king this day of Saul and his descendants." But David answered Rechab and Benaiah, his brother, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, and said to them, As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all adversity, when someone told me, saying, Look, Saul is dead, thinking to have brought good news, I arrested him and had him executed in Ziklag, the one who thought I would give him a reward for his news. How much more, when wicked men have killed a righteous person in his own house on his bed? Therefore, shall I not now require his blood at your hand and remove you from the earth? 2 Samuel 4, verses 1 through 11.
The momentum of violence is very hard to stop because the hearts of men and women all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. The heart is desperately wicked. Who can know it? These are the words of Paul in Jeremiah. The hearts of men and women tend to violence. So once the energy is put into it to get it going and war begins, then it's very hard for war to end. War never ends with a conflict overseas. We simply bring the stress and the violence home in our lives. It takes Sar Shalom, the Prince of Peace, to be able to actually create a time of peace. We watch this today in 2 Samuel 4. David has been at war for decades with Saul. Saul has been at war for decades with David. And you can't just stop war like a switch, because when the momentum goes and the demonic forces, the demonic infrastructure has its way, there's a momentum, and that train has to stop through the power of Jesus Christ and Jehovah Messiah. And so today we look at the momentum of war and we see what is happening. Now here's 2 Samuel chapter 4. Let's begin with looking at verses 1 to 3. When Saul's son heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost heart, and all of Israel was troubled. And now Saul's son had two men who were captains of the troops. The name of one was Baana and the other one was Rechab. These were the sons of Rimmon. They were Berechites or Berechites, the sons or the children of Benjamin. For Beeroth also was part of Benjamin. And because the Beerothites fled to Gittim and had been sojourners there until this day. And so here's what we find in our very first connection to understanding the mind of Christ through the Bible. True peace is impossible for the spirit of a man to attain. Only the divine Prince of Peace, Sar Shalom in Hebrew, has the authority to negotiate peace for and within our souls. Beloved, it is so important for us to realize that although men have the ability to begin war, we naturally tend to violence. This was a spirit that was released when Cain killed Abel back in Genesis chapter 4. To stop war, to truly stop war, doesn't mean you simply run out of resources. Because when you run out of resources out here, the war continues in here. The hate and the violence continue in here. All you need to do is ask the veterans who've come home from war, and they will tell you of the trouble in their souls because of war. And so it takes the Prince of Peace, Sar Shalom in the Hebrew. That's one of the names of Jesus Christ in Isaiah chapter 9. Very, very important. And here we see that war momentum, that war machine continued, even though David had no enemies theoretically. The enemy was inside the hearts of his men. 2 Samuel chapter 4 verse 4 says, Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son whose feet were lame. He was 5 years old when news about Saul and Jonathan had come from Jezreel. And his nurse took him up and fled. And it happened that as she made haste or ran to flee, that she fell and he became lame. He mangled his feet, and his name was Mephibosheth. Now, this is an interesting sidebar in the Bible. Listen carefully. Wars and rumors of war create an atmosphere of paranoia in a society. This causes us to maim ourselves because, like that nurse who is running, that nurse who is taking off to try to save Mephibosheth, like that nurse who's running in fear and falls and maims the boy for life, That's how we do when we live in fear all the time. All we do is live in fear, live in fear. We're running and running and we maim ourselves. God is not the author of fear or confusion. God, no, He is the author of peace. The first order of heaven is peace. So keep that in mind. As we study on in 2 Samuel 4, verses 5 to 10, 5 verses here. And then the sons of Rimmon, of the Beerothite, and Rechab and Benaiah, set out, and they came about to the heat of day to the house of Ishbosheth, who was lying on his bed at noon. And they came there and all the way into the house as though to get wheat. And you know what they did? They stabbed him in the stomach. And then Rechab and Benaiah, his brother, escaped for when they actually had come into the house. He was lying on his bed in his bedroom, and they struck him and killed him. They cut his head off, and they took his head, and they were all night escaping through the plain. And they brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron and said, "King, here is the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, who is your enemy, who sought your life. And the Lord is avenged on my Lord and the king this day of Saul and his descendants." But look at verse 9, beloved. And David answered Rechab and Benaiah, his brother, the sons of Rimmon of the Beerothites, and said to them, "As the Lord lives, He who has redeemed my life from all adversity, when someone told me, saying, 'Look, Saul is dead,' thinking they would bring me good news, I actually arrested him and had him executed in Ziklag, one who thought that I would give him reward for his news." You see, David understood something. You see, beloved, there is never any victory when souls are killed. There is never any victory when a human soul is extinguished. There is only victory in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who overcame death. That's why, beloved, I do not believe in victory parades. I do not believe in them. I believe there should be a great day of solemn searching of heart after a nation has won a war. Why were so many lives necessary to be extinguished to resolve this problem? The church should have a day of mourning instead of a victory parade. I cannot celebrate, even when the terrorists are killed. I cannot celebrate. It's still a life, a human life. And so, beloved, we must remember, when we look to Jesus Christ, the reason we celebrate and the reason we have victory is because Sar Shalom, Prince of Peace, will one day put an end to all of this war.
There's a lot of places, cities mentioned by the Bible that when you pay attention to their arrangement and their mentions in the scriptures, you recognize that they must have been some sort of an important city. And when you piece that together with archaeological and other historical documents, a more comprehensive picture comes together on just how important these cities were and what their functions were and how they worked in everyday life. Now, one of these places is the city of Hebron. It has a vast history within the Bible, so you and I are going to explore it right now.
Hebron's long history is first recorded in the Bible when Abraham stays here in Genesis 13. He stays near the great trees of Mamre. Here at Hebron, Abraham built an altar to God. He was visited by God and two angels. He received the promise of having a son. He negotiated with God on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah. And later on, Abraham purchases the cave of Machpelah as a burial tomb for his family. Today, there are two ancient oak trees that some claim are the famed great trees of Mamre. Herod the Great, before the life of Christ, built a structure around the cave of Machpelah. And since then, a church, then a mosque have been built over top. Hebron's history continued on with Israel during the conquest of Joshua. It became a Levitical city of refuge. King David actually ruled from this city for a while, and some of his sons were born here. In fact, his rebellious son Absalom later returns to Hebron, his birthplace, and begins a conspiracy to overthrow his own father.
There are those who are deeply offended by them and want them removed from public view. Others are so dedicated to them that they personally display them on their private property. The exposure of their precepts have been challenged and argued in some of the powerful courts of the most powerful countries of the world. They are hated, they are loved, despised, and revered. They are the Ten Commandments. But what do they really mean? Are they still relevant today? Bible Discovery Seminary and Quick Study Television present Out of Egypt with the late Dr. Ron Hembry, a set of 4 teachings on video exploring the meaning and the messages of the Ten Commandments. When you support Quick Study TV and Bible Discovery TV with an offering this month, we'll send you 2 DVDs including 4 hours of teaching on the meaning of the Ten Commandments by Dr. Ron Hembry. Thank you for your faithful support. We are deeply grateful, and your generosity in these times means much to us. We are supported by viewers just like you. To get your copy, write to P.O. Box 456, Orangeville, Ontario, L9W5G2. In the United States, P.O. Box 150, Murraysville, Pennsylvania, 156680150. Or you can go to BibleDiscoveryTV.com and give online.
Now, the roster of political, social, and economic think tanks of man's world will never understand the values of Christ. While nations scramble their weapons to protect the interests of their individual countries, God sees a world full of souls. Now, the interests of God are faith, hope, and love. Believe me, these are rare commodities in the presence of any human institution. Even ancient Israel's best king could not stop the attitudes of destruction in the minds of his finest men. When we study these passages, we see the testimony of God against the ways of these men, like Joab, David's commander. So let us remember that in the physics of God, human life is sacred, and a supply of provision and wealth to live by is promised to those who subscribe to God's ways. We need not go to war for it when we subscribe to the values of heaven. I think that's one of the most important things we learn from the testimonies in the first century church. And this is, of course, the day in which we present testimonies, and here they are, testimonies from the early church.
AD 304, one of the most amazing heroes in early church history emerges. In AD 284, the evil Emperor Diocletian came to power through an overthrow via the military. This tyrant set out to restore the former glory of Rome. This restoration of Rome meant a state-sponsored rise of the worship of the pagan gods, including the other emperors previously. Caesar Galerius, Diocletian's powerful lieutenant, convinced the despot that the Christians should be purged, killed, tortured, all to purify Rome. In AD 303, the purge began. In that time, a young devout teenage girl named Agnes committed her life to Christ and pledged to be a virgin all of her life to serve the Lord. In these days, this was not uncommon among the young women. Being a Roman citizen, Agnes was stalked by the young Roman men who wanted her as a bride. She refused to marry. As a result, a group of wealthy men charged her with crimes against Rome, not fulfilling her duty as a woman Roman citizen. Being arrested and brought to court, Agnes was threatened with torture and humiliating acts of rape if she refused to make herself accessible as a Roman citizen to be married. Agnes' official verbal response is recorded in ancient Roman history. She said, "You may stain your sword with my blood, but you will never be able to profane my body, because it is consecrated to Jesus Christ." This public proclamation so infuriated the judge that he ordered her locked into a local public brothel and encouraged men to rape her and abuse her. Many tried, none succeeded. They would become overrun with fear when they took sight of her. Being made a public mockery, the judge then sentenced Agnes to death. She was beheaded, pure in body, and buried near the Via Nomentia, where there is a church built today. The name Agnes means chaste, and the body discovered buried underneath the church was indeed that of a young girl who had been beheaded.
They overcame the evil one by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. So this is why we present the testimonies of the early church. The church is rooted, and our faith in Christ is rooted in real history. I wonder, one way we can overcome is by overcoming ignorance through the Bible Discovery TV Challenge, which is...
That's why I'm here.
That's right.
Who had a son named Mephibosheth? Was that Saul, Ishbosheth, or Jonathan?
That was Jonathan.
You're absolutely right. 2 Samuel 4, verse 4.
Of course, the grandson of Saul, and there's a great story there how David took care of him, and there's a very, very important story showing the compassion of David. And there was this kind of struggle in David's life. He was a man of war, but at the same time, he was also a man of peace, and he just had this overwhelming struggle in his heart, which demonstrates our sin nature. Until we get to the place where we are free from the gravity of the sin nature, we will struggle in ways, but God will help us overcome, as David did. Here's Watch and Pray. Thank you for your prayer requests. Let's agree together for these folks who've written in. We're talking about the injustice done to David as we continue to focus on through the next few days David's life. And what's stunning to many people is his ability to deal with the injustice done to him. Well, that's because David trusted the Lord. And David would give his troubles over to God. Now, how do I know that? Because David wrote the Psalms. And the Psalms are prayers to God, and God gave him relief. Today, if you are bitter and hard because of the injustice that is done to you, don't let that eat you up. Don't let it destroy your life. You can know the power of forgiveness. Jesus Christ offers forgiveness to you. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. But Jesus said, Behold, I stand at the door and knock, and any man who lets me in, I will come in, and I will have fellowship with him. And God so loved the world, you know, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. So today, return the power of forgiveness by asking God to forgive you so that you can forgive others.